Hello, I'm Ivy and I'm a 31-year-old woman. I've been married to my husband Mark for about 6 years now. Our relationship has always had a lot of ups and downs, if I'm being very honest. The reason for this is my mother-in-law, Jill. Jill and I were as opposite as they come. Jill was a very traditional woman. She believed that men ruled the house and that women were supposed to be submissive to them. I didn't hold any of these views, but I never chastised her for her views in any way. I understood that she came from a generation where that was the norm. However, times have changed, and regardless of the gender roles, to survive in this economy, both genders needed to work. Jill never worked a day in her life, at least worked anything but housework. I, on the other hand, had started working at the age of 15 because I didn't come from a financially stable family. If I wanted to have anything, I needed to work for it. I developed a really good sense of work ethic, and a majority of my teenage years and my 20s were spent outside the house. Because of that, I never really learned how to do housework well. I mean, I can clean the house and make sure everything is neat, but if you asked me to cook, I wouldn't get very far. Jill absolutely hated that. She hated that I was working to begin with, even though I made more than Mark. She constantly belittled me and called me a disgrace to all women. The first time this happened was when we first met. At that time, Mark and I had been dating for over a year, and he wanted to introduce me to his mother. His father had died just a year ago, but he left Jill with enough money to live the rest of her life comfortably. Being that she was the only parent he had, he wanted me to meet her and get her approval. We met for lunch at her place. She seemed really nice and welcoming at first, but all that changed when we started eating lunch. So, what are you studying right now? I'm studying digital marketing. Oh, and why is that? I wouldn't expect that to be a course that's popular among women. Oh, well, it's pretty popular in general. With the way the world is developing, there is huge scope for digital marketing. I chose it for that primary reason. So, you mean you plan to work after you graduate? Of course. At this rate, I don't think I'd be able to survive without working. Okay, that's enough about Ivy, Mom. Why don't you tell us about how you made this casserole? It's really good. Can it, Mark? Tell me, Ivy, why do you say that you can't survive without work? Well, I've been working since I was 15 to support myself. 15? Did your parents not help you out? Of course they did, but I needed money for other things like extracurriculars or even just to buy myself things that I liked. That is the job of the man of the house, not yours. Well, both my parents worked really hard to make sure I had food and a roof over my head. I didn't want to burden them even more. It's a good thing, though. I know how the corporate world works, and I have a pretty stellar work ethic. That's disgusting. Excuse me? Women are not supposed to work. I tried to ignore the fact that you showed up in jeans because I hoped you were more feminine than that. But this I can't tolerate. What's so wrong about working? If I didn't work, I wouldn't be able to get an education. What does education matter when you have to take care of your house and kids once you marry Mark? Okay, that's enough, Mom. You either stop talking or Ivy and I are leaving. I remember being so appalled at Jill's ideologies. After that, lunch was pretty much ruined. Jill kept glaring at me and would not even look at me. Mark tried his best to lift the mood up, but Jill would not budge. After we left her place, which she insisted on me doing, by the way, Mark apologized a lot for his mother's views. He told me that that was how she was raised, and his dad was a man who believed in those views as well. The only thing I could think about, how lucky Mark was to have been born a man, because if he was a girl, Lord knows he would have had hell to deal with. Of course, I didn't interact much with Jill after that. Even if I did try, she refused to acknowledge me. She would even frequently text Mark, telling him that he deserved someone who would submit herself to him and not some pansy who barely stayed home. Her digs hurt a lot, but I eventually learned to ignore them. I knew that her hatred stemmed from her lack of experience and knowledge, and maybe she was resentful that I was living the kind of life that she was never able to. I tried my best to be patient with her, but after Mark and I moved into our own place after graduating, Jill would drop in unannounced a lot. She would literally come over right after Mark and I would get back home from work just to insult me. She would call me a disgrace for not having a hot meal prepared for her tired son who worked long hours. I tried to defend myself by telling her that Mark and I worked the same number of hours, so there was no way that I could do everything she wanted me to do for him. She wouldn't listen, and eventually I stopped trying to defend myself to her. She would then walk around the apartment and pick apart everything that was wrong with it, from the interior design to its cleanliness. I dealt with it for a few weeks, but afterwards, I had to put my foot down. I talked to Mark about it after Jill had come over that day and yelled at me for not recognizing that one of the bulbs in one of the lamps in our living room was dimmer than it used to be. Yes, she was that particular about things. I just can't take it anymore. I'm so sorry, Ivy. Your mother can't just waltz in every other day to berate me. Do you even know how much anxiety I've been experiencing this past few weeks? I've been having nightmares about it. I'm so sorry that you have to go through that. Sorry won't cut it, Mark. Well, what do you want me to do? There are a lot of things you can do. For starters, maybe tell your mother not to come over so often. You know I can't do that. I'm her son. Great. Then you go over to her place. You don't get to decide who comes here and who doesn't. I live here too. I'm not saying that your mother isn't welcome here. She's welcome here as long as she isn't going to insult and belittle me. Look, you know my mom has a lot of strong and strange opinions. I wish I could contradict her and tell her to stop, but she's too sensitive for that. You need to do something about it. Don't you see that I'm getting hurt because of it? You can't just watch your mother hurt and insult me for hours and get away by telling me sorry. Sorry isn't making me feel better. Okay, I'll tell her to stop coming over more often, but I need you to know that that won't stop her from coming over. And being herself, that's just who she is. I wasn't happy with that exactly, but Mark stuck to his word. I began to see Jill less frequently, and I could finally breathe in peace again. Although I will say that Jill seemed to hate me even more than she did before. I couldn't even bring myself to care about it. We spent a good few years without her interference. Mark still visited her a lot, but I kept my distance from her and instead just focused on my work. I got promotion after promotion, and Mark and I began to live very comfortably. When we were around 25, I got pregnant. At that point, our relationship wasn't at its best because Jill began interfering in our relationship once again. She kept telling Mark that I was emasculating him by being the one who earned more money, and it started getting to him. He began withdrawing himself from me and became very passive-aggressive. I was going to leave him, but the pregnancy changed things. I very well had the means to leave and never tell him a word, but I felt like that was the wrong thing to do. I still loved him very much, and he deserved to know that he was going to be a father. Surprisingly, Mark was really happy when he found out that he was going to be a dad. So happy, in fact, that he did an entire 180 with his personality. We became even closer as a couple. He began to stand up to Jill whenever she said anything against me. Although her insults stopped when she found out I was pregnant because she believed that pregnancy was me fulfilling my role as a woman, not to mention she thought that it meant I would stop working. I didn't have the heart to tell her that it wasn't going to be the case, mostly because I didn't want to be pregnant and deal with her hatred towards me. Mark and I decided to get married at a very small and intimate wedding where all our guests were only our closest friends and family members. A few months after getting married, we had our son. Mark began to distance himself from Jill after the birth of our son. He took his role as a father very seriously. He had no time to be with Jill, although he still did talk to her every day on the phone and visited her once every other week. Jill was fine with it and even accepted that this was all part of the process of her son growing into adulthood. What she did lose her mind over was my returning to work after 1 year of my son being born. My company was very progressive, and I got paid maternity leave for however long I needed. Once my baby was weaned and able to be away from me for extended periods, we put him into daycare. Jill would call and text me every day to tell me that not only was I an awful wife, but I was also a horrible mother. She even tried to call CPS on me once, but that matter was very quickly resolved, although Jill did get a stern warning for false reports. After that, a switch flipped in Mark. I guess nearly having his son taken away because of his mother's prejudice rocked his world in the worst way possible. Mark and I had a lengthy discussion about Jill's behavior, and we decided that we did not want her to be a part of our lives anymore, at least until the foreseeable future. I was surprised that Mark was willing to take such a large step, but with what she said, there was no telling of what she could do in the future. We just wanted what was best for our son, so we went over to Jill's place the next evening after our huge discussion and told Jill about what we were planning on doing. "Oh, hey Mark, how are you doing?" "Look, Mom, we're just going to cut to the chase here." "Oh, no need for all that. Why don't you guys just come on in? Let me see my grandbaby." "No, don't act like you loved our son when you tried to have him taken away from us." "I only reported it because I didn't think Ivy was being a good enough mother." "If she wasn't being a good mother, I would have taken care of that myself. You have no right to interfere in our family." "I am a part of your family. If you were, you would have treated Ivy with the respect she deserves. Why don't you see how crazy it is for you to leave your baby with strangers?" "The decision to put our son in daycare was a decision we made together. It is not up for debate. And I get that you have an opinion about it, but I mean this most respectfully. I don't care. We know what's best for us, and I want you to stay out of it." "This woman is brainwashing you into believing all this mumbo-jumbo. You know what your father would have done if he knew how you were raising your son?" "Ivy is not doing anything of that sort. She earns more than me, and in fact it would be wiser for me to quit my job and become a house husband than her to stay at home." "You wouldn't dare. Whatever happens in our family, you have no right. Stay out of it. I'm tired of you imposing your ideologies on us. If you try to do anything more, I will have a restraining order placed against you." After that, Jill pretty much stopped bothering us. Initially, she still texted and called us a lot, but eventually that too stopped. Out of obligation, Mark would make weekly calls to ensure that Jill was doing okay, but that was the extent of our conversations with her. That was how it passed for the next 5 years. A lot happened, but let me tell you, there was not a day that went by where I wasn't grateful that Jill wasn't there to berate or insult me. That all changed when she reached out to Mark one day on her own. She had called him when he was at work. When he came back home, Mark seemed really distressed, but refused to speak about it except to tell me that Jill had called him. He behaved weirdly for the next few days, no matter how many times I asked him what that call was about. Finally, I had enough, and I asked him for one last time what was wrong. "You better start telling me what's wrong, or I'm going to call Jill up myself and find out." No, don't do that. I'll tell you." "Good. Now tell me." "Mom called me the other day to tell me that she needed our help financially." "Financially? Didn't your dad leave her with more than enough money?" "That's exactly what I asked her. She told me that she got scammed and ended up losing all of it." "My God, what kind of scam did she get roped into?" "I'm guessing a Nigerian prince scam, whatever it is. I've been stressing out about it." "Why didn't you come to me about it?" "Well, I was worried that you'd get really mad and tell me not to help her out." "I don't like your mom, but I'm never going to be as cruel as her. What do you want to do about it?" "Well, I know we have our own finances, but I really don't have anything by the end of the month to give Mom." "Of course I'll help her out. How much do you think she'll need?" "Around $2,000. That's going to require us to cut back on some things, but that's fairly doable." "Thanks a lot, darling." "Of course." To be honest, I was not happy to hear that Jill had managed to lose all her money. Now, I had no idea about how much money was in there, but I knew that it was more than enough for her to be able to not only eat out every day, but also buy herself all the fancy things she wanted without her having to bat an eye. For the next few months, I sent Jill the money. Funnily, she never complained about me sending the money instead of her son. Maybe she did see just how valuable I was to our family and why it was so important for me to work. I rode that high of having silently put Jill in her place for those few months, and then it all came crashing down. Me sending Jill money every month opened the gates for her to enter our lives once again. It started off with Mark and Jill getting on call every other day, and then Mark started visiting her. I had no problem with it. As long as Jill wasn't insulting or belittling me, she was free to make her comeback. When Jill started coming over to our place, she was nice, or as nice as she could be. She would ignore me for the most part, and I was grateful for that. But as time passed, she got bolder and began to go back to her old ways. This time, instead of standing up for me, Mark ignored everything that happened. It only got worse after that. For the next year, I went back to being tormented by Jill. I tried to get Mark to do something about it, but he always told me that his mother had just gone through something traumatic, so he couldn't be mean to her. I was frustrated, and I felt like I was back at square one. My only comfort was that my son wasn't being exposed to the way that Jill treated me. That was until one day at dinner I happened to accidentally spill some food on the table, and I was serving my son his food, and he called me a ditz with hay for brains. I stood and stared at him in shock. That was not something my son would ever say to me. But there was one person who would do that: Jill. In fact, she has called me that many, many times. I gently asked my son where he heard that phrase from, and he revealed that Mark had been taking him over to Jill's when I was at work for the past few months. To say I was livid was an understatement. I told Mark that Jill was under no circumstances allowed to see or interact with our son until he was 13. I didn't want her views to shape who he was in any way. To find out that Mark crossed the only boundary I had made me see red. So I decided that I needed to get even. I had one thing over Jill, and that was me sending her money. Although maybe it was because of how angry I was, but in that moment I realized just how weird it was that Jill got scammed out of all her money. There must have been a lot in there, and even she was not stupid enough to give her account details to anyone. She wouldn't even let Mark use her card. I decided to do some digging. The next day I went over to her place and told her that I had been trying to transfer her some money, but the transactions weren't going through. I told her that I had called my bank and my account was in the clear. I asked her if I could check if something was wrong with her account. Jill was hesitant at first, but she eventually let me in and gave me her phone. She watched me over my shoulder as I looked into her bank app and did not let me see how much she had in her bank at all. I went through the FAQ and troubleshooting options before I decided to give up and tell her that I just call her bank for her. I shut off Jill's phone and placed it on the table in front of me. Jill finally relaxed and even offered to get me something to drink herself. I accepted her offer, and while she was away, I unlocked her phone again. I knew her passcode, so all I needed was a few minutes with her away. I looked into her account, and she has well over $1 million in her account. I was shocked to see such a large number, and even more enraged at the fact that she had been lying for months just so she could come back and torment me. I set the phone back down to the way it was when she left and quickly made an excuse and left. I was fuming. I decided to not send her any money because she had no need for it. I didn't tell Mark anything about it because I was still wrapping my head around it. The next day, though, while I was at work, Mark called me. "Ivy, what the hell?" "Wow, what happened to hello?" "Don't you try and play smart with me right now." "You either calm down or I'm hanging up." "Don't you dare." I'm giving you 5 seconds to tell me. Why didn't you send my mom the $2,000? We're already a week into the month. I didn't want to. What? Why? Why don't you check her bank account before yelling at me? What do you mean? I went over to her place yesterday and managed to sneak a peek at her account. Let me tell you, she does not need money. How dare you say that my mom is lying? She would never lie. Wouldn't she? She's always done that. You need to cool down and we can talk after you see her bank account. Bye. Now, I don't know how Mark managed to get a hold of his mother's bank statements, but let me tell you, the fallout was not pretty. Mark picked me up from the office that day and he apologized to me over and over again for his behavior. I forgave him, but I told him that I wanted to know why Jill was taking money from us when she had more than enough. At first, Jill refused to admit that she had money, but Mark had printouts of her bank statements, and then she confessed. She told us that every day since she stopped talking to us, her hatred for me only grew. She saw no other way of hurting me, so she chose to exploit the one thing I was proud of, my income. She knew that Mark would have no way of supporting her, and only I would. She thought it would damage my ego. Mark and I looked at her in horror. Her line of thinking was so twisted that we couldn't wrap our heads around it. Mark told her that this time onwards, he wanted nothing to do with her. Jill tried to beg us not to leave her and even called me a witch, but Mark had none of it. Over the next few weeks, we had a restraining order placed against Jill. We blocked her everywhere and refused to associate ourselves with her. We got many calls from Mark's family regarding us abandoning Jill, but we welcomed them to take care of her since we couldn't. Mark is slowly trying to process everything, and I've been trying my best to be there with him. I know that things can only get better from here on. Thanks for listening.